What if I told you Britain's global domination wasn't about being the strongest, but about building the smartest system in history? By the end of this video, you'll know how winning almost bankrupted them, how a trading company accidentally seized India, and why losing America was the best thing that happened to the empire. Empires usually just smash, grab, and pray. Rome marched, Mongols charged, Spain plundered gold. Britain decided to trade. Instead of ruling directly, it outsourced risk to merchants, investors, and private companies. And instead of draining the homeland to support the empire began to pay for itself. That wasn't accidental, it was structural. Britain's navy protected trade routes. At the time, they were kind of like the muscle of the seas, and no one came close. Trade routes generated wealth. Wealth funded factories, weapons, and ships. And those ships reinforced more trade. Round and round it went, faster every decade. By the time Britain's rivals realized what was happening, they were already trapped inside the system. Interesting point. At its peak, Britain controlled 1/4 of the Earth's land surface. A war that made Britain rich beyond imagination and nearly bankrupted it at the same time. Because in the next chapter, everything explodes as Britain fights a war on multiple continents and discovers that victory can be just as dangerous as defeat. The 7 Years' War wasn't just another European conflict. This was really the granddaddy of wars, up there with the greatest. It was the first true global war in human history. While most wars were still fought on single continents, this one erupted everywhere at once. In the forests of North America, the ports of the Caribbean, the courts of India, on the battlefields of Europe, and Britain was fighting on all of them. At the heart of the war was a simple question: who would control global trade? France and Britain were both expanding empires, but they played very different games. While France was more of the track and field athlete, Britain was more the elite level swimmer. France focused on armies and alliances, on trade. Britain focused on something else entirely: the ocean. It didn't try to outnumber France's soldiers, it just cut them off. British warships blockaded French ports, strangling supply lines before battles even began. Troops couldn't even be reinforced, colonies couldn't be supplied, allies couldn't be paid. On land, France fought well, but without the sea, victory didn't matter. At this point, Britain was behaving much like the next prodigy, who would dominate for years to come. The turning point came in 1759. British forces sailed up the St. Lawrence River, something France believed was impossible. They climbed the cliffs outside Quebec, defeated the French army on the Plains of Abraham, and within months, Canada was effectively lost. One city fell, and an empire collapsed with it. The same pattern played out in India. British naval dominance allowed troops, weapons, and money to arrive where and when they needed. French forces were crushed. Their colonial capital at Pondicherry fell, and Britain emerged as the undisputed power on the subcontinent, not through conquest, but through access. If this video is still afloat Please give it a like. The Royal Navy would really approve. Winning the world came at a brutal cost. The 7 Years' War left Britain drowning in debt, the largest national debt it had ever carried. They kind of had been living above their means for a very long time, and all the heavy nights and extravagant spending, with no thoughts of tomorrow, were catching up. To survive, Parliament made a fateful decision. If the empire benefited from the war, then the empire would have to pay for it. New taxes, more bureaucracy, stricter control over distant colonies. From London, it looked very reasonable. From across the Atlantic, it looked like tyranny. Interesting point. Britain spent more money paying interest on its debt than running its entire government. The American Revolution wasn't just about freedom. It was about who paid for empire and who got a say. While Britain believed it had won the right to tax its colonies after saving them from France, the colonists, on the other hand, believed empire without representation was just another form of tyranny. They would fight a war to prove it. Britain lost more battles. It lost its richest settler colonies, control of the Atlantic world, global prestige it had just fought to secure. For the first time, the empire had been broken by its own subjects. Instead of shrinking, it adapted. London didn't abandon empire. It changed strategy. Settler colonies were messy. They demanded rights. They resisted control. So Britain looked elsewhere. The wrong lesson. If white settlers could rebel, then future empire would be built without settlers. Asia, Africa, trade over representation, control without consent. Losing America didn't end the British Empire, it hardened it. And nowhere would this new imperial model be tested more brutally or more successfully than in India. India wasn't conquered by the British government. It was conquered by a corporation. The East India Company began as a trading business, buying spices, silk, and tea. But slowly, it became something far more dangerous. The company raised its own private armies, collected taxes, made laws, and ruled over princes, cities, and millions, all while answering not to voters but to shareholders in London. Two battles changed everything. Plassey, 1757, a small force, bribery, betrayal, and modern weapons shattered a much larger Indian army. Buxar, 1764, the Mughal emperor himself was defeated. After that, the company didn't just trade in India, it ran it. By the late 1700s, Britain had become the dominant power on the Indian subcontinent, not through colonists, but through contracts, cannons, and cash. Did you know, at its peak, the East India Company ruled more people than Britain itself? Empire alone doesn't explain British dominance. Machines do. Britain became the world's workshop, the world's banker, the world's shipbuilder. They were more like everything rolled into one, like a Swiss army knife. Steam engines powered factories, coal-fired furnaces day and night. Iron became rails, cannons, and ships. For the first time in history, one country could outproduce the rest of the world combined. Why Britain? Not luck, structure, coal close to the surface, a stable financial system, strong property rights, and global markets guaranteed by empire. factory turned raw materials into wealth. The Navy protected trade routes. Banks recycled profits into more machines and more power. Britain didn't just conquer land, it conquered time and distance. Ships moved faster, goods became cheaper, wars could be supplied across oceans. No empire in history had ever combined industry and empire like this, and the world would never recover from it. In 1805, at the Battle of Trafalgar, Admiral Horatio Nelson destroyed the combined French and Spanish fleets. France could no longer invade Britain. Britain could now strike anywhere on earth. From that point on, British power didn't depend on occupying territory. It depended on blockades, cut off food, cut off trade, cut off money. Empires collapsed without British troops ever marching in. Most empires fall the same way. One bad ruler, one civil war, one revolution, too many. Britain was different. Power didn't sit with one man. Over centuries, authority shifted from kings to parliament to institutions. The monarchy became symbolic. The system kept running. Like a very reliable Japanese car, they just kept going. This made it more flexible, stable, hard to overthrow. While the neighbors, France, Spain, and Latin America, kept going at it, tore themselves apart through revolutions, Britain absorbed shock after shock and adapted. Even rebellion abroad often strengthened Britain at home. Laws were adjusted, taxes refined. The system evolved instead of snappy. Britain didn't rule the world because it was brutal alone. It ruled because it outlasted everyone else. By the reign of Queen Victoria, Britain stood at the peak of human power. The empire stretched across every continent. British ships moved the world's trade. You just have to admit, Britain at this point was just old money. Its banks financed global economy, and London became the beating heart of the planet. This was the age of confidence. Science, railways, telegraphs, steamships. Britain didn't just lead the world. It defined progress itself. But beneath the surface, cracks were already forming. The empire was overstretched. New rivals were rising. Germany and the United States. And the moral contradictions of empire were becoming impossible to ignore. An empire built on trade and freedom ruled over millions who had neither. Britain ruled the world because it mastered 5 things better than anyone else. Naval power, controlling oceans instead of borders. Finance, turning money into influence. Technology, outproducing rivals. Institutions, systems that outlived individuals. Timing, rising at the exact moment the world was ready to be reshaped. This wasn't destiny, it was alignment. No empire escapes history. The same forces that built Britain's empire, industry, education, global trade, spread knowledge and power beyond its control. Former colonies industrialized, rivals caught up. The world became too connected to dominate. Britain didn't fall overnight. It was outgrown. If this video earned your respect, not just your time, hit like. It tells YouTube this kind of history deserves an empire of its own. So here's the real question. Was the British Empire inevitable, or just the perfect storm for geography, greed, and genius? Let me know what you think in the comments.